I love that phrase.
Yeah.
Straightforward and gentle in speech.
Yeah, from the Metta Sutta, right? Straightforward but gentle in speech, right? So we're not trying to bulldoze anyone or demean anyone, but we have to be direct about the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that power has been massively consolidated. So we don't want to have...
continues to be.
Yeah. Hello dear YouTube Sangha. Welcome to another episode of Buddhist Perspectives. In this episode we will be discussing wealth inequality, wealth disparity in the United States. I am Dharma Peace.
And I'm Dharma Sense. Welcome to our channel.
Yeah, so today it's a little bit informal because we are here again at Kava Java in New Smyrna Beach. So if you ever feel inclined to come, try it out and check it out, they have plenty of awesome, delicious beverages. We happen to know the owner, Pete. He's a great guy. Highly recommend it.
Great place.
Yeah, it's very beautiful. It's on Canal Street, right next to all the beautiful sights. But today I brought a little bit of something here. I've raised the issue with everybody in peace of mind, and I was like, one of the things we didn't cover was wealth disparity and how that is actually a clear and present issue, especially in the United States, especially in these times. There's a lot of things cropping up, a lot of stories in the media cycle that, it just seems to be an inevitable topic that we should bring up. So I wrote a little blurb to share, and maybe I could get your thoughts on that. So to introduce the topic, I wrote, the wealth gap in the United States has become one of the most pressing social issues of the 21st century. Over the last few decades, the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, particularly large corporations and the ultra-wealthy, has exacerbated inequality and has had far-reaching consequences for American society. This disparity has contributed to an increase in homelessness, public unrest, crime, and healthcare disparities. So that last list there, I think, are the main key topics that I wanted to cover.
Mm-hmm.
But do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think the wealth gap and the wealth inequality, not only does it contribute to sort of social malaise, but it doesn't have much use for democracy as well.
Correct, yeah. And it's interesting that you were sharing with me that little talk by, well, not little, but a talk by Noam Chomsky, how he was discussing how, certain trappings of this wealth disparity have no place in a democracy, right? It's almost like you can see the centers of power at work there, right? In the sense, in the Chomskyan sense. I don't know if that's
well, in a true democracy, power resides with the people, and
regardless of wealth, right, or income, right, or socioeconomic status,
right?
Yeah.
But when you have concentrations of power in the hands of fewer and fewer people, they don't like a lot of people stepping on their power. They want to have unfettered control. And so as their wealth increases, their power increases, and the opposite is true for the general population. Yes.
And that said, while this is a topic about how there is a disparity of wealth and it's disproportionate, you wanted to bring up the fires in LA, right? And
yes, we just wanted to extend our compassion to all those who are experiencing the fires out in Southern California, the Pacific Palisades. Our hearts go out to all the people affected and who are suffering from the devastation out there.
Absolutely, well said. Because in the Buddhist perspective, there are no enemies, as it were. Please do not get it misconstrued that when we talk about wealth disparity, we're not trying to focus on any particular group of people and say anything disparaging about them. It's more or less that we're just talking about how certain views and certain aspects of society actually affect people disproportionately, and sometimes people in our society don't necessarily have a sense of that. They don't have perspective on that or an insight to it, So, wouldn't you agree that that is kind of what we're trying to accomplish here?
Sure. If the goal is an egalitarian society, obviously, if you concentrate wealth and power into the hands of a few, it's not going to work out that way.
Correct. And so we don't want to we do have to talk about these hard issues, the cold hard facts about it, but with compassion and also acknowledging that the humanity of those who do work in the circles of power. I never once was lost on that concept that think about while I was in the army that I was around generals and top brass, and I saw their humanity, and it was like, if anything, like the Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh taught was like, we should have compassion with people, for people, even though they don't necessarily do the things we agree with, and we know that sometimes they act unjustly,
Right.
So
even in our loving kindness practice, we are extending our compassion to people we don't agree with, people we don't like, people we would be at odds with.
Yes. But at odds, some people, it just seems like we can't help but say we are sometimes at odds. And
it's just speaking factually,
right?
And holding people account who are guilty of certain actions.
Correct. Yeah. So it's like not to put anyone on the spot, but at the same time, it feels like sometimes they're on the spot anyway. They that's where they belong. That's where I would belong if I was in that position, and I fully acknowledge that. So, again, in this video, we will discuss, and to be more on point, we will discuss the disproportionate wealth accumulation by corporations and the ultra-wealthy, coupled with policy inaction, which is basically what it contributes to the exacerbating issues in ways that other nations with smaller wealth gaps have managed to avoid. And by other nations, I'm talking about the OECD. And the OECD would be the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So those are the developed nations in the country, or what, those nations decided that they were developed. And so they decided that they could make commentary or make policies based on economic standing, and without fail, the United States seems to our citizens seem to get the raw end of the deal among OECD countries. That includes like Scandinavia, the EU, just countries like that, Japan.
Right. Yes. Well, it comes down to, I think, morality.
Yes. Yeah.
It comes down to a sense of, is it all for me and none for you, or are we a society that we share and we look out? I pay my taxes, I pay into Social Security because of a notion of solidarity. When I pay my taxes into the system, it's going to help out the widow across town. And who relies on a Social Security check. So it's that notion of really, it gets basic down to human value. Are you in it for yourself, or are you in it for the community?
And that's a great point, because as a Buddhist, we understand that we have karuna, compassion, and we have metta, loving kindness, and that includes all living beings. So it means that there's no blind spot, like when we talk about the Metta Sutta and what that pertains to, especially at the end, may all living beings be happy and well, and may no harm come to them, may they learn compassion. That is an affirmative, that's an affirmation saying that. And we also talk about whether weak or strong, what was it? So the great or the mighty, weak or strong, omitting none. Yes. The seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. We're talking about all beings, and so that's our moral ethos and our moral parameter, right? Which is unending. It's endless, And I feel like so when you have like a moral parameter like that, it's hard to not. I mean, we look at these issues in a wholly different way than like a lot of other folks in our culture, right?
Right.
Um, and but you got some age on me, so I remember when I was younger, and there was a sense of community and a sense of like, and I know that I went through some hardship and I went through a lot of challenges. I did. I went through. I moved through broken homes, but there always seemed to be like there was just a vernacular and the way that people spoke. It was more communal, right? And would you say like that was how you felt growing up, or?
I would.
Yeah.
I think that there has been a massive cultural shift over probably the last, I would say, 4 or 5 decades. I feel like I live in sort of a unique time, not only like pre-internet, post-internet, but also at a time where if you're talking about the wealth gap,
Yeah.
we're kind of saying like what happened to the American dream.
Yes.
Because, for example, in the 1950s and 60s, my parents' generation, when they were getting started in life and building a family, their corporate taxes were higher, dividends were taxed at a higher rate. And it was the largest era of growth in America. And there was like democratization movements. You had the civil rights movements. You had women's liberation coming onto the scene. And so there was a real push to sort of look out for the working class, the middle class. And you could essentially have a middle class, working class job, be able to buy a home, a car. If you're, in a married situation, often one spouse could stay home and raise the kids while, the breadwinner went to work. And it led to sort of everybody kind of prospered together. And I think there was maybe more of a sense of community. But that doesn't do great for businesses in the sense that they would rather have lower tax rates.
Well, yeah, they're
more money, and so there is a push back against all that. And if you look at the history of sort of like regulation of the financial institutions, well, first you would have to say that there was a massive switch from like banks and financial institutions to being kind of a sort of had a smaller role in society.
Right. And now they have the whole, like now they own society, essentially.
Essentially,
yeah.
They have a much bigger piece of the pie.
Yeah. So you, the viewer, like the house that you live in, invariably it's owned by the bank, correct? Like, like most people don't own the homes they live in.
Right.
Which that wasn't always the case, right? There was a time when people would buy property and set a foundation and build that house from the ground up, and that's no longer a norm. It's not even like, and by norm I mean that in two senses, like as in not a majority and not a belief that is shared, right? Like it's not a norm to be like, oh, I'm going to build my own house from the ground up. It's going to be a homestead. It's going to house people, my flesh and blood. That those family elements, I feel like almost eroded. And we can even point to it chronologically. There are like periods of our history that, the famous Tony Judt, who was like a historian, who was a British-Israeli historian, like basically in the same league as like Noam Chomsky, and I think they were contemporaries, and they knew each other, and then there's the observations of the former Secretary of Labor, Robert Reich, who he stated that the disparity between wages and housing costs have never been greater. In 1971, the average worker could afford a house with a year's salary. By 2021, the average worker would need nearly 4 years' worth in wages to purchase a home at the median price. So that's like median price, median salary, right? But most people aren't even at that so-called median position, right?
Yeah. One staggering statistic that I found today in preparing for this talk with Peace this evening was 80% of Americans currently live paycheck to paycheck, meaning they don't have money left over for savings.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you don't accrue savings and you don't have
how do you have money to grow? The economy is growing.
Yeah.
Right? The economy always grows. It gets larger with population. The GDP of America is enormous. We are the envy of the world economically.
Right.
However, the wealth gap, the people out that are homeless, like in California, you see it. It's visual. It's not anything.
Right. No, it's
it's a real crisis.
No, it's actually really interesting to me how many people I get into conversations about, like, not at the temple or just in my family or people affiliated in my periphery, and how often they get into conversations about the growth of homelessness and the growth of poverty in the area, drug what's the word? Dependency.
Right.
Drug dependency, just economic hardship and financial hardship.
How can we be the wealthiest nation on the planet and we have this going on? It's a moral failing.
Yeah, and so like if let's say employment was like a sole marker indicator for how well our society is doing, then like we would be well off, but that is not the sole indicator.
Right.
And like the working poor is actually a huge issue.
Right.
And there's also not just that, but labor statistics are skewed to not show the unemployed, like those who have been unemployed for a prolonged period of time, who have stopped seeking employment. Those people often get swept under the rug, under the radar,
right? Because
they're not accounted for, and that is something that you learn about in basic, American federal government or basic, economics 101 or whatever you want to call it.
And really, the only entity that can stand up to corporate tyranny is organized labor, and organized labor only accounts for about 7% of all the workers in the world. So it's really the scale is tilted, especially now with the election of Donald Trump, who is an authoritarian backed by not only Elon Musk, but I think all of the major
powerful elites.
Leaders, Tim Cook from Apple, they've all essentially donated massive amounts of money to his inaugural fund. So we live in scary times. People essentially in those situations are looking out for their own interests. And so it's going to be tougher for the average person to make it in the coming years. And what to do about it is really the question at this point.
Yeah, and I would agree that. So we're looking at a new administration and what it means for those who are very watchful of wealth disparity. It means that it's going to be, if not worse, it's just going to be protracted. Mm-hmm. So it's just going to be like, it's going to continue with business as usual, no longer seeing the disparity there and the way that it handicaps people who are already struggling.
Right.
And one of the things that I noticed living abroad, because I didn't know about this. I didn't know about the growth of private hospitals being raised around Florida, especially. So when I had left the country, Halifax and Blue Cross and all that, those are arguably like organizations dedicated to medicine, but now we're seeing things like Advent Health, and if you work for Advent Health as a private institution, like, I'm not condemning anyone, but the fact remains that the growth and rise of private health industry has basically rendered people's insurance, like if they're on Medicare or Medicaid, or insurance that is not like a PPO or is not a prime sort of form of insurance. Well, they basically get wiped from the slate. And then there was a period of time that I researched, and I can't like bring the citation up right now, but it's in my book actually. But I discussed about it at length for about half a chapter. Actually.
Well, there's a major movement on the right to privatize everything. You've got private prisons. They want to privatize schools. I think public education is one of the greatest entities that we've ever had in America. It certainly built the middle class in the time referenced before, the 50s and the 60s. Coming back after World War II, they had the GI Bill, so the soldiers could attend college. Otherwise, when they wouldn't have been able to afford it. And that launched us into the greatest manufacturing boom that we've ever had. But that's all deteriorating now again, and it's just a simple equation of wealth consolidation. The more you consolidate wealth into the hands of a few, the more power that they are able to exude over the masses, the less power that we all have and the less opportunity we all have. Kids getting out of school now, mounted with all kinds of student loan debt. They're underwater and already stuck in a system that's very hard to dig out of. When you start out like in debt, in massive debt, and then you go try to buy big ticket items like houses and cars and things like that, which you have to borrow money for. So the deck is being stacked against us at every turn. And where do you go? What do you do? How do you combat it? Well, we talk about it. So.
Well, it's like, yes, we need to raise the concern. And I feel like, and essentially it's awareness raising, right, that we're talking about. But also, I feel like as Buddhists, we can share that these issues, when they crop up, we don't react in the same way that, people who are disgruntled or outraged do. Is that we see how that manifests, like we've seen it in the news cycle. I don't think I have to bring it up. It was an event that happened in New York. Unfortunately, I heard a lot of people in our Sangha talk about it. And they, were essentially, I don't want to say condoning, but they said, I can understand why someone would do that, But as a Buddhist and as someone who has taken the precepts and who's
we practice ahimsa.
We practice non-harm, ahimsa, and I've vowed time and again every day that violence is not the answer.
Never the answer.
Right. The Buddha had said, only love can conquer hate.
Right.
Listen to some Marvin Gaye. What's going on? Because he quotes the Buddha there, and so did Martin Luther King Jr.
But I would go as far as to say that situation did highlight a sentiment across America. It does highlight an us against them kind of posturing that a lot of people are feeling, simply because the deck is so stacked against us, and it is medical debt ruins people's lives. It's impossible. Insurance now is, especially here in Florida, is near unaffordable.
Right. And nor does it get you the benefits that it's supposed to, right? You pay towards something,
right?
And it's like an investment, as it were, but there's no return on investment, right? There's no, you're not actually seeing.
You're not even sure your claim is going to be accepted.
Yes, which is now we know that is, very. It's very present and clear that is having its effect on people, and the resounding approval of inhumane actions now in the public eye. We can see that, and again, the Buddha would not condone the way that people react in that way. However, I think the Buddha does speak a lot about how when you're mistreated and when you see other people being mistreated, what you were supposed to do.
Social justice.
Social justice is a major issue there, or major tenets there. I think was the sutra about the monk with dysentery that comes to mind a lot. Because people think, oh, well, we should practice non-attachment in Buddhist circles, We should not attach ourselves to those present issues. But when someone you care for deeply, which is supposed to be everyone, it's supposed to be the cosmos, if you can imagine, but if you care about people deeply, then you treat them, you bathe them, it's just kind of give a little bit of context. The Buddha had various temples and monasteries scattered throughout northern India, and he had frequented them. Like he would, they were all itinerant, but they also had their own temples, right? So, and he would go to each one, check on them. The monk that had dysentery was actually one that he held dear in his heart, and he noticed the other monks did not bathe him, they didn't treat him well, and they said, why? He asked the monks, why aren't you caring for this monk with dysentery? And they said, he does nothing for the temple. And so there you have, it's very blunt. They're saying he does nothing for the temple. He's not helping us, so we don't help him. And it's also this mistake that they're practicing non-attachment. Mm-hmm. So in the deeper aspect of the Buddhist practice, where we're practicing non-attachment or whatever, and but the Buddha said, this is he rebuked them. It was like, okay, who was to care for you? Like your mother's not here, your father's not here. And then, a master waits on his pupil waits on his master. And he goes through the various relationships. It says that when someone is ill, when someone is not doing well, and that extrapolates into society, I feel,
It does.
And so that is, and of course, like the Buddha's life and his Sangha, the way that Sangha grew is a testament to what social justice and action looks like, Right. So they're more or less, we can compare it to a commune and how it wound up being a cultural sort of shift that changed people's actions, much the same way of the civil rights movement. Right. And what the Indians had done with Gandhi. And the list goes on. There's actually lots of examples of this through history, but the ones that I feel bared out the most, even the suffragette movement, they were non-violent. Right. And they were very much like, it's the only thing that works in this situation is cooperation. Right. And accord, and at least, but the thing is that it always starts with a resounding no. We will not continue like this. Right. So the bus boycott would be like for civil rights movement, Sure. When this stopped, boycotting is a big way to indicate that you don't condone something. But it's like, nowadays, it's like the elites found ways, different levers of power and ways to spin on a dime when that happens, right? And then there's also these boycotts that don't make a lot of sense where, like, for example, there's not a Starbucks anywhere in Palestine, but there are like Palestinians who are not, I love you Palestinian friends, but what I'm saying is that there have been people who, boycott Starbucks, saying that they are like, anti-Palestinian, and they actually refuse to have any of their shops in Palestine or in Israel. I'm sorry, in Israel. I misspoke. But anywho, what are some other like social justice ways or civic engagement? Would you think?
Well, we always want to persuade and win hearts through example and through rhetoric, and we never want to coerce or
use force of any kind. Yeah,
right. Which is something that we fear now, as our military is being threatened to coerce other countries that have previously been.
Yeah, our long-time allies.
But yes, I think standing up and saying a firm no I've been personally thinking, like, where are the heroes? Where, like,
Yeah.
I've seen the kleptocracy essentially take root in Washington. Where are the people with American values standing up that are countering that?
Yeah,
the people that in those positions of power that have the kind of money that are saying no.
There have been
It shouldn't
people of
just
us,
be two middle-class lay Buddhists in front of an iPhone that are, talking about these kinds of things. I've said it before earlier, it's a real moral issue. And so I wonder, where's the morality? Where are the real men that are willing to stand up and say no to this kind of robber baron? Barony.
Right. The robber barons were like, I honestly feel like we know who robber barons were, but robber barons were like J.P. Morgan or who else? Like Rockefellers. The people who established corporations in the United States. And then there were large unions and large organizations that rose up against those robber barons,
right,
who were in power. They had, like, this is where we get like the term coffers from, and like lining pockets. They literally did those things in our Congress, and until like trust busting became a thing, and where we had certain policies. Teddy Roosevelt came in. He was a controversial figure, but one of the things he did was he immediately recognized the problem of corruption. Mm-hmm. But this day and age, it feels like lots of people are deluded about that. And that includes people, it just includes a lot of people in a lot of circles that I move through.
What is Musk's wealth? I think $280 billion.
Yeah.
And he added another $1.5 billion since Trump took office.
Yeah.
Or was elected. He hasn't taken office yet.
It was like it's like that Neil deGrasse Tyson said. It takes like a week to count to 1 million, and 30 days to count to 1 billion or something. Like that's one of those factoids. Where it's,
but how much happier? How incrementally more happy can you be after a certain amount?
Yeah, right, and
it makes you wonder what kind of greed drives somebody like that. And to be so divisive at the same time.
Well, and
spread disinformation. There really is. I'm sorry, we said we weren't going to disparage people, but I'm speaking for myself. There is evil in the world, and it manifests inside other human beings. We can still have compassion for those people. They still want to be happy and avoid pain, and so we're all in this thing together. But at the same time, I think it's important to recognize the players who are perpetrating evils in our world, and I think that he is a prime candidate for that.
Wow, okay. So, and I would like to second that, where I was in a discussion with someone, a regular at our temple, but he has a more of like a hippie vibe, and not to say that that's wrong. I'm just saying that that's, the perspective from where he's communicating. And he said, there isn't really such thing as like evil per se. And, the term evil does exist in Buddhism. And there is such a thing. And it also is like, I had used an analogy with him Sunday actually. And it was that, as Buddhists, we are concerned with certain types of evil, and it has to do with delusion, and then anger or aversion and greed. Those three things working together do comprise evil. But also, when your thoughts and your actions and your habits inform you to take actions like mow down people on Bourbon Street, prepare to and things of that nature, or the less obvious things. So that would be like a direct form of violence, right? Mm-hmm. But I like Johann Galtung, is like one of the premier peace studies academics. He said that there's such a thing as systemic violence, mm-hmm. or which means that's pernicious and it occurs over time. Systemic meaning that it's the way society is built. It's the way that policies are enacted, and the violence that we're talking about is like people being thrown into health crises, people being thrown into the type of poverty that makes you malnourished, and children go homeless, and that's actually a form of violence.
Family separation, would that fit into that?
Yes, and so how much do you really need?
Inflicting trauma on children, separating them from their parents and
exactly,
losing them?
Yeah. So in a sense, we believe in karma. Like, I believe in karma in the sense that, there's cause, condition, and effect.
Yes.
And if, the cause has wrong intentions, like delusion and greed and aversion,
yes,
because aversion's part of it too, where we talk about racism or even just, systemic racism or whatever the colloquial way of calling it, these things exist.
Right. We haven't even really
verifiable.
touched on that, about the wealthy, the inequality gap affects people of color worse than white folks.
Yeah. So, and I actually come part from an Italian background, where that's actually a blind spot for a lot of people as well, where we can actually sort of sympathize with people of color, because Italians were persecuted too, or were, let's say discriminated, not persecuted, discriminated, like in places like New York City, inner New York, Louisiana, and so it's
every ethnic group that came over at one point or another before they assimilated.
I think like one of the reasons I'm saying this is because I know what it's like to come from, like, I was born in the ghetto, basically in inner city Rochester. I experienced, like, I stood in a welfare line with other people of color, and like, and the thing is that, like, I realized that we didn't have wealth in our family. It was just because it was systemic. It wasn't for lack of trying. Everyone worked hard. Everyone, like, I'll never say that my grandfather didn't work hard, or my grandmother even. She worked until the day she died. Like, she worked with cancer,
Yeah.
And I saw that in my family. And it was like, it was just odd that, as a kid, like, I was like 12, and I was like, why is she going to work? She has cancer. She had a heart attack.
Yeah.
But it simply was because she had to survive. I didn't understand as a child how she couldn't stay home.
Right.
It was like my grandmother.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, I wanted to just correct my thing earlier about counting to 1 million and 1 billion. I was wrong in the fact that it takes about 30 days to count to 1 million.
Oh.
And it takes
even longer.
32 years to count to 1 billion.
Wow.
That's quite something.
Wild.
So if you're earning,
we better get started.
If you're earning dollars by the day, do you think you could do it? Like, save to 1 billion for saving $1 a day for 30 years?
Yeah. Jeez.
But the thing is that the issue with it being systemic is that there's something called the cost of living, right? And the cost of living has risen to such a level that it's hard to keep head over water. And it's recently, I just, the number of people that I know, living with their extended family or friends, it outpaces anything in history, right? Like,
when you say systemic, I think a lot. First of all, deregulation.
Yeah.
Has done a lot.
Yes.
Of the financial institutions specifically. I think it was about 2007 or 2009 we had the Supreme Court Citizens United decision.
Yeah, that's right. Versus the FEC,
yeah, which allows unfettered money into campaigns by corporations, which had been deemed persons.
Yeah, right.
Which is
corporations being persons. That's a
right, and who can now donate, literally, and just essentially purchase by the elections at this point.
But there was another Supreme Court case, the McCutcheon case, where they said there's no limit, there's no cap to their campaign contributions. So regardless of person or not, which so
the increase in the lobbyists now that essentially representing special interests constantly in Washington. So it's really become a club for the elites, where the wealth and power of the country is being more
massively consolidated
into not just a few hands, but into like a 0.5% of the population. I think I saw another statistic that absolutely blew my mind, is that 1% of the population owns 50% of Wall Street of stocks.
Right.
All of them, and it's just not sustainable.
Well, it's also patently undemocratic, because we're talking about
you see this kind of power grab, this kind of money grab. At the same time, you see rise in fascism across the world, not just in the deterioration of democracy, the deterioration of the power of the people.
So
we all have our social media and our distractions and things like that. Our voices haven't been completely silenced, but at the same time, we have a lot less purchasing power. We have a lot less effect over the outcomes of elections.
Exactly.
We just have much less say in how our lives are essentially being.
Just being led. We
how we can lead our lives.
I always think what you want about Mel Gibson. I don't, but there's that film, The Patriot, right? Remember how there's that scene? Okay, so there's a scene in that film in the beginning where he says, "Why would I trade one tyrant across the ocean for 50 tyrants right in front of me?" It was like, that is kind of, I always like that line. I don't know if that is even the correct way. I'm paraphrasing, okay? Some number of tyrants is what he said. And, but the message was well received for me, because I was like, that's exactly what I think. I was going through undergrad, and at the time I was actually, when I watched the film, I was in the Occupy movement. So, and not that I agree with everything that happens in those demonstrations. I don't. As an engaged Buddhist, I think that there's a better way to go about things. Improving our optics, improving our way of speaking, our manner of speaking. Just being more amicable, being, straightforward but gentle in speech. Like Martin Luther King Jr. in a sense, Like that man is, him and Thich Nhat Hanh, the Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, those two contemporaries are probably the most important people I've ever read about, listened to in my whole life.
I love that. Straightforward and gentle in speech.
Yeah, from the Metta Sutta, right? Straightforward but gentle in speech, right? So we're not trying to bulldoze anyone or demean anyone, but we have to be direct about the problem. And the problem is that power has been massively consolidated. So we don't
continues to be.
Yeah. And one of the things I wanted to do, since, is for my own personal YouTube channel, is I'm going to cover the Federalist Papers, and also a contemporary understanding of them. So just going over what our framers had intended for this country, but also going through it through a more contemporary critical analysis, showing what has changed and what hasn't, and how we understand. For example, the term social justice was enshrined in the Federalist Papers. So it's not just like some, colloquial vernacular that we were like, like how they came up with that SJW stuff, for social justice warrior. No, it is an actual, demonstrable, thread woven into the fabric of our society and our country. And I feel like it's actually un-American to dismiss that. And be like, that is not part of our nation, when in actuality, it's on the same parchment that the Constitution was written on.
Right.
So from the same people.
Yes.
So,
but heroes, I know there are some out there.
Yeah.
There have been in the past. I recently read a biography by John Meacham on Abraham Lincoln, who constantly referred back to the Bible, constantly referred back to the original documents, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, to guide essentially America through the Civil War and to bring us together afterwards again. And believed the words that he was espousing. I do too. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, assure domestic tranquility. Those are powerful, sacred words, and we should not lose sight of our founding. We should hold on to the principles and the values that this country was established upon, and wealth inequality was not one of them. Actually, it sort of was at the time, because our founding fathers were wealthy landowners, and they
because I know someone.
So there's some irony in there.
There'd be some of my friends over there to be like,
ideals,
"What are you talking about?" Like, like those guys were totally. But here's the thing.
But
their intentions were to establish a better union, right? So they wanted. They were very egalitarian, and they, Thomas Jefferson, a few of them, they took a lot of influence from, was it John Adams, John Locke, people like that, but they also critiqued them as well. They didn't just take it all hook, line, and sinker. They were like, no, these were very wise things. They were wise people, like Rousseau, whoever, but they also had their own critique of them.
Yeah.
And so they said, instead of, writing it out in theory, let's put it into practice, and make a nation out of it. And that's the thing that I feel like is lost on a lot of folks.
And George Washington set a heck of a president when he walked away from power when he could have.
Right, absolutely, yes. He had he was enshrined, like what was it called when you they enshrine Washington almost like a god in a sense, like apotheosis. But the thing is that he was like, no, I am just a man.
A man.
They were like, how do we refer to you? And he's like, Mr. President, like, don't. So but you see, now it's like, what do we do? Where do we go from here? I think that it is very important that, like as you said, we need to start a coalition. We need to start gaining critical mass.
For people who were devastated by the election results, I can sympathize. I know that there are a lot of people out there right now that just want to check out, like they've had enough. Resistance.
Trust me, we've been there.
Right.
We're like
people don't have the energy for the resistance like they did the first time around. I get it, because I felt that way myself. I was like, I just don't want to watch the news anymore. I don't want to pay attention to it. Personally, I don't want to hear Trump's voice ever again.
Much less other demagogues who are actually more hateful, believe it or not.
Yeah, but there are two doors, right, that you can walk through. You can walk through one where you just let everything happen to you, or you can engage and try to make a difference in the world. And if you have any kind of fire in you to want to make a difference, you've got to step forward. You got to speak truth to power, and apply yourself.
Yes, it essentially, like Foucault said, that Michel Foucault is a French philosopher, but he said that there is no separation of power and resistance, right? And the way that power, when it's consolidated, the thing that needs to happen is that it needs to be diffused, right? Just like a bomb. Power is being consolidated, and it's being done in an unwise fashion. Like, whatever your opinions are politically or socio-politically, it really is beside the point, because we can see it bear out. We understand, like, we can see the lingerie, or the I always think of the French word. What are we talking about? Like the long term or long run sort of case analysis here, and consequences of one issue being wealth disparity, and for that to continue, unmitigated and not and unrecognized for a lot of the time nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like social media actually plays a role in that. There's like an algorithmic sort of sleight of hand happening where people's attention and we call it the illusion of salience in political science and political philosophy. I don't know if you ever heard this term, but illusion of salience means that there are certain pressing issues that should be addressed. But because of the way that the news cycle and the way that social media, the way that certain things happen, people think that this thing is as salient as the pressing issue.
Well, I think you divide the public, you get them fighting amongst one another, you get them distracted with superficialities, and you pick their pocket.
Yeah, that exactly. So divide and conquer, as it always was, and the good old Pax Romana, right?
Yep.
So the
attack public education, attack Social Security, take away mom's Social Security check. It
erodes the fabric of society. Yeah.
You have to be aware enough to know your enemy. Not that you're trying to build up an enemy. But if there is one, you have to recognize it, be honest about it, and then take a stance. You can either let them roll over you, or you can say, no, I'm not okay with that.
And before we wrap it up, I wanted to just tell you that who it affects the most when these disparities go unrecognized, it's the most precarious people. So it's people of color. The way that the migration crisis has been covered as a migration crisis, and it's more of a humanitarian crisis.
It's a humanitarian
that
crisis.
is affecting people from other parts of the world.
Right.
Then it's entire families and societies that are being affected. Not
critical thinking is required to look at root causes and not just outcomes.
So and also if our concern is for larger, just the bigger picture of all of humankind and all of society, then as Americans, we can look at that and say, well, we have the skills and the ability to help people like that, and not to turn them away, and to welcome them with open arms. But again, we do need to get that figured out, because otherwise, what great nation are we? What makes us great as a nation if we're not helping people who are in the most need? And so it's affecting the children the most, the women and the elderly. Okay, so if you care about people in those demographics, which covers everyone's family members, then change needs to happen for the better, right?
Change needs to happen.
And in this case, I would say it's like peaceful resistance, right? It was what that translates to,
right?
Like
Gandhi. Like Martin Luther King Jr., like Thich Nhat Hanh.
Right. And I feel like we will talk about this again, and maybe we do have a couple people that would like to be interviewed for this kind of issue. So, you're always welcome to come to Kava Java and maybe watch us do our podcast here. Everybody's welcome. So, our dear friends, YouTube Sangha, if you got something out of this and you made it this far, first of all, if you got something out of this and you have a question or comment, please leave a comment. Please remember to like and subscribe if you want to see any more of our content. So if you got this far, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu to you.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.